Hello everybody and welcome to our second Getting Started with LiveCode, Learning LiveCode Q&A. We'll just wait a few minutes for everybody to join us and then we will get started. We've got a couple of questions from last week that I didn't get a chance to address, so we'll start off with those. But if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll pick them up from there and have a look at them. And hopefully everybody has been enjoying working with LiveCode. Hopefully you've been managing to progress, but we're here to answer any questions that you have, so do just drop them in the chat. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes for people to join, and then we'll get started. I'm just having a look just to see if anybody has joined us. Yes, we have at least one person. It says that there are some people here, but not in the room yet. So hi, Bruce. You're the first person to say hello. Welcome back. Just give it a few minutes, and hopefully we'll get some more people attending. Otherwise, just ask your questions, Bruce, and we'll do our best to answer them all. Okay, so we're starting to have some questions. We've got a question from Peter, but I think what I'll do is I'll start with the questions from last week because I've got a couple of things prepared and they will show us a couple of nice things in LiveCode, and then we will address the questions that are coming in on the chat. Okay, so I'm going to start by opening up LiveCode, and hopefully I've sort of reduced my screen resolution a bit this week, so hopefully it's a bit clearer to see. And just to double check that everything is looking all right, I will add a little bit of code here. And hopefully that is, let's just add a mouse up there. So hopefully this is all a bit more visible than it was at the start of last week. When I look to the side like this, it's because I'm looking at the chat to see what you're all saying. If there are any problems with visibility or if anything needs to be enlarged, then do pop me a message and hopefully I will pick it up quite quickly. Okay, so let me just close these because these are not quite what we're going to look at. So the first question I had was about creating a scrolling menu. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly what the attendee was looking for, so I have come up with an idea which will be useful to show you anyway. And if it's not quite what was meant, then just ask again and we can do a slightly different example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a sort of image viewer where when you click on the images, they slide onto the next one. You see this quite a lot on websites, sort of the banners at the top of a website, and there will be 3 or 4 that it'll show you. And it's quite nice because it'll see how we can interact with different object types, and also it'll show us how to display images in LiveCode. So I'm just going to start with a new stack, and I'm going to create an iPhone 6 size stack. Just it's quite a nice size. It means we've got some space to put things and plenty of space to show our script editor over here. And we're going to start by adding an image object. So the image object is one of the classic LiveCode controls. It's not a widget, it's just a classic control, and we just drag it on and we'll stretch it out. And I'm going to start by opening up the stack inspector, and I'm going to give it a name. It's always a good idea right at the start to name and save your stack, because then you can just use Control or Command Save to save as you're going along. Don't want you losing any of your hard work. Just call that image viewer, and I'm just going to save it. And I've already got a folder here called image viewer. Share my screen, sorry. Right, so let's just start from here again. I hadn't done very much, so I've got a second screen now so that I can look at I can see your chat but I hadn't shared my screen. So hopefully it is there now. So I started just by creating a new stack at an iPhone 6 size, and then started by adding an image control, which is this one here. So it's one of the classic LiveCode controls, not one of our widgets, just a sort of a control that's always been part of LiveCode. And then I decided to give my stack a name and save it. So I open up the open up the stack inspector, because I'm going to give the stack a name. Like I say, it's always a good idea to name and save your stack quite early on, because then you can just use Control or Command S to save your work as you're going along. So we don't want to lose any of our work. So I'm just going to call this image viewer, and I'm going to save it as, and I'm going to put it in a folder on my desktop called image viewer. And just to show you, before we started this session, I created this folder image viewer, and in there I've got an images folder with just 3 images in it, and these are the ones that we're going to use for our example stack. So that the way I'm going to set it up is that you could keep adding images in here. You could have as many as you wanted, and it would automatically flip through all the images. So of course, the first thing we needed was our image control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give that a name. So from the object menu, open up the object inspector this time, and we'll just call this photo. You can call it anything you want, but it's usually a good idea to give it a descriptive name. So later on, when you come to write your code, it's easy when you're reading your code back to know which control you're referring to. If you had 50 images called image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you just want to know which one you're talking about. Now, what we are going to do here is we're going to go to the size and position pane of the property inspector, which is this one here. It's got the sort of little cursor position icon. And this is where we can set the width and height, etc., of our image. Now I've just dragged it out to roughly the size that I want. They're all landscape images. If you want it to be a very specific size, you can actually type in here. And then the important thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to lock the size and position, and that will stop it changing size. So when you set an actual image data on an image control, it will automatically resize to be the original size of the image unless you lock the size and position, which will force it to remain the size that you created it on your stack. So now we have our image photo ready. Now what we want to do is when the card is first opened, we want to show our first image, and then we're going to set it up so that when we click on the image, it flips to the next one. So we're going to start by doing something on our card script. So we go to the object menu and we open up the card script. Now every object in LiveCode, the stacks, the cards, the controls, they all have script associated with them. So you can do things when a stack or a card is opened or closed, when you change cards, things like that. Not everything has to be on a button or a field, it can actually be sort of at a higher level. So we're going to start with the pre-open card handler, which is listed here, pre-open card. And pre-open card is sent before the user actually sees the card on screen. So anything you do in pre-open card will be done sort of invisibly to the user. So any layout or setup you want to do can all be done, and then when the user sees it, it's already all set up. There's also an open card handler, but the things that you put in open card, the user will actually see happening. So if you move things around or reset things in open card, the user will see those moving around on the screen. So anything you want to do before the card becomes visible, you do in pre-open card. So what we're going to do in pre-open card is we're just going to call a handler show next image. That's it. And then all our work will be in the show next image handler. So pre-open card is a message, so that's automatically sent by the LiveCode engine when the user opens the card. But show next image is going to be a custom command that we write. So we'll call it, it's a command, and it's show next image. And what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to keep track of what image we're on, sort of what number of image we're on. And to do this, we're going to use a new thing called a script local variable. So in LiveCode, you have global variables, which are accessible everywhere. You have local or temporary variables, which are only available in the handler that they are defined in. And then you can have script local variables. So a script local variable is declared outside of any handler and is available to all the handlers within this script. So in this case, it's going to be available to any scripts on this card. So it's not going to be local to pre-open card or local to show next image. It's going to be accessible to anything on this script, but not outside of the script. So within a button or on the stack, it wouldn't be accessible just on the card. And we create these by declaring local outside of any handler. It has to be outside of any handler. And then we give it a name. So I'm going to call it, I'm going to start it with S, which stands for script local, and we'll just call it image index, because it's just going to be a number that we can use to keep track of which image we're on. And when the card is first opened, we're going to put 0 into S image index, because when we come to show next image, we're going to add 1 to it and then show that image. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to get the list of all the images that we want to be able to see. Now, we know that our images are on the desktop, in our image viewer folder, in our images folder here. And we know that our image viewer stack is at the same level as our images folder. And we're going to use that as a way of finding the images that we want to refer to. Now, LiveCode has a really useful function called the special folder path. So the special folder path function will give you the path to common locations. So it could be your documents folder, it could be the desktop. In this case, we want to find things that are resources for this particular app. And in that case, it's things that are next to our stack here. So when you're in the IDE, special folder path resources will point to the folder that your stack is in, and it's also a special folder path that will work on in standalones. So desktop and mobile standalones all have special folder path resources, and it'll point to the resources that have been included in your built stack. So you can always use special folder path resources to find images, sounds, videos, anything like that that are relative to your actual app. So what we want to do is we want to find a list of all the files that are in our images folder. So I'm going to declare a variable here, so local to file list. So this is just going to be a list of our files. And we're going to put files, and then we're going to give the name of the folder that we want the list of files for. So the files function will give you a list of the files in a folder, and you can pass it the location of a folder. So in this case, we want special folder path resources. In this case, on the desktop will just be the folder that our stack is in. And then we need a slash because we're looking at a folder inside that, and our folder is called images, and we'll put that into our file list. Just so that we can see what's happening, I'm going to put a breakpoint here so we can run our code and pause it there and see what's happening. And there's two ways that I can cause pre-open card to be called. The first way is to click on the stack, go down to send message, and then choose to manually send one of these messages. So I can send pre-open card. We get down here, if I step over that, we can now use our variable watcher, open this up, and you can see that in there is .ds4, and then there are our 3 files. The other way that you can do it is you can use the message box. And if you type in the name of the message that you want to send, pre-open card, in this case, and then just hit enter, it will send the message for you as well. So this is really useful if you want to check things that you've done in pre-open stack or pre-open card, rather than having to sort of move away and come back so that LiveCode sends the message. You can just send it manually for testing purposes. So you'll notice that in our file list, we have this .dsstore file. Now that's obviously not one of our images, so we're going to filter that out. And we're going to do that using the filter command. So we can filter our file list, so filter t file list with, and then we give it the filter that we want to use, and we want to filter anything that is anything. So the star is a wildcard, so this will filter out any files that begin with dot, which is what we want, because those are system files and visible files, things like that. You can use the filter command for anything. You might be looking in a resources folder and you might want to filter out all the images. So you could filter out anything that ends in .jpeg or .png. It's a really useful command. So that should filter out our .dsstore file. So now we have a list of our images. And so we're going to start by just showing the next image. So we're going to add 1 to S image index. So when we first started, we were on 0, we add 1. And then we set the file name of image photo to, and it'll be special folder path resources / images / the first image. So actually I'm going to put this into a variable because it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. And if we want to debug, then we can look at the contents of the variable. So I'll call this t image path. So we'll add 1 to S image index, and then we'll put special folder path resources. And then / images, and then another / because we're going to put the file on the end, and then it'll be line, oh, I need my ampersand there. So my string concatenation, and it'll be line S image index of T file list. So we'll start off on line 1, and then we'll look at line 2, line 3, and then we'll set the file name of image. So on that, I need to put that into my variable, into T image path. And then we'll set the file name of image photo to T image path. Now we'll apply our code, make sure there's no errors there. And again, we'll send our pre-open stack message. It doesn't want to do it this time, so I'm just going to send it from the message box. Sorry, pre-open card. There is an error. So let's see what's happening there, see what I've got wrong. Oh, so my filter, sorry, I've done filter with, it should be filter without. And we'll just make sure that's applied, and we'll send our pre-open card message again. So let's check our file list is now filtered. We add 1 to S image index, so that is now 1, so correct. And I have a typo here. And LiveCode crashed there. So I'll just restart that, and while that's restarting, I will have a look at the chat just to see if anybody's commented on anything. So Peter noticed my error with the filter command. So yes, so you can filter with or you can filter without, and I'd used the wrong one. So I'll just now restart this, and we'll see how much of my code in the card script is still there. Oh, none of it. So I'll just cheat here, and I will copy the code that I wrote earlier and just get us back to where we were. So we started with, I called it S image index, open card, put 0 in, show next image, and had my file list, and I had my image path. You'll see here that I've got, just take this out because we're going to do this later. So we're getting our file list there. We'll filter the file list without .star, add one to S image, and I'd put this into a variable. So I'm going to put special folder path resources / images / line S image number of file list into the image path. This is S image index this time. And save this in case I lose it again. And then we set the file name of image photo to T image path. Okay, so let's try this again. Let's send our pre-open card message. Set the file name image photo to T image path. And maybe I didn't name this photo, so we'll select the image, open up the object inspector, and call it photo. And send our message again. In the message box this time. And I hadn't changed this to S image index. Now we have our image, and you can see what I mentioned earlier, where if you don't lock the size and position of your image, when you set the file name, it will automatically resize. So I must not have saved my stack with that change on it. So we will make sure we're in edit mode, select the image, open up the object inspector, go to the size and position. We'll set this to 300, and I'll set this to 260, and I'll stretch that out a bit because it doesn't look quite right. And then I will lock my size and position. And if I call pre-open card again, then it won't resize this time. I'll just save all these changes. Okay, so now when the card is opened, we will always show the first image in our folder. What we want to do is we want to be able to click on the image to move to the next one. So to do that, we're going to add some code to the image. So select our image, open up the object script. We're going to use a mouse up, so I'll just click on it there. So a mouse up isn't just sent to a button, it's sent to any image that you click on. Any control that you click on. So images, scroll bars, locked fields. It's not sent to fields that you can type into, so it's not sent to editable fields. They get a different message, but mouse up will be sent to an image as well when you click on it. And when we click on it, we're just going to call show next image and apply that, because what that should do is then, because this is a script local variable, and when we click on it, it'll have one added to it, and it will show the next image, and that will go on. So we should click on it and it will change. Click on it again, it will change again. Now, because we've only got 3 images, when I click on it, of course, once we go past 3, then it's going to start showing nothing. So we're going to put in some code to allow for that. And we just come back to our show next image command. So we'll leave in our add one to S image index. So we've increased the index. What we want to do now is we want to check if it's got too high. So what we can do is we can say if S image index is greater than the number of lines in T file list, then what we'll do is we'll just loop back round to 1. So we'll put 1 into S image index. Basically what we're doing is we're getting to here, we're adding 1 to the next image, then we're checking to see if we're now beyond the number of images that we have. So in this case, we'd be on 4. And if we get beyond the number of images that we have, then we go back to image 1. So it just creates a loop. So now if I pre-open card again, we go back to the first image, go into run mode, click to 2, click to 3. When we click, it goes back to 1. So now we'll never sort of run out of images, we'll just keep looping through them. And the last thing I'll show you here is how to do a nice transition from one image to another. So here it's just being replaced, but what we can do is we can actually use a nice sort of slide in and slide out transition. Now the only place in show next image that we actually change what shows on screen is when we set the file name of the image. So what we're going to do here is we're going to lock the screen. So we say lock screen, and locking the screen prevents any screen updates until you unlock the screen, and then all the updates are sort of shown at once. So if you're moving multiple things around, if you're rearranging things, what you can do is you can lock the screen. You can do thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, thing 4, thing 5. Then you unlock the screen and you just get the updated screen all at once rather than the user seeing things moving around. And in this case, what we can do is we can lock screen for visual effects, because we're going to use a nice visual effect to slide in and slide out. You can also use visual effects to transition between cards, things like that. And we're going to do it in rect, so rectangle, I'll use the full word. So the rectangle describes an area. So it's the left, the top, the right, the bottom. So we only want to lock the screen around our image here. So it's in the rect of image photo. So every control has a rect that just describes exactly where it is on the stack. So we lock screen for visual effect in rectangle of image photo. We then make our change, which is just this one line here. And then we unlock screen with visual effect. And then we say what type of visual effect we want to use. In this case, I'm going to use push left fast, but there's a whole range of visual effects that you can use. Sorry, it's in rectangle, and I have to say that it's the rectangle of image photo. Yeah, so this we're going to use push, but there's dissolve, there's swipe, there's a whole range of them. You can see them in the dictionary if you look up visual effect. So I'll apply that. I'll just quickly save this. Now when I change the image, we get a nice visual effect. And because we've locked the screen, if there were other things on screen here, if we had some other controls, let's just add some here, you only see the change in that area. You don't see a change here. If you change the whole screen, you'd see these also slide off and slide in. But in this case, we just want the images to change. So the important things that we learned there, we learned about the special folder path to look in particular folders. We learned about filtering the list of files. We learned about visual effects, and we learned about how to show images. And I'll just show you in the property inspector for the image. This is the file name property. So as we saw last week, you can set any properties in code or in the property inspector. So you can see there's the full path to the file that we're looking at, /user/Elanor/desktop /image viewer /images /Elandonan castle. Okay, so I'll just have a look at the chat, see if there's any question there. Oh, so Peter's asked if the image viewer can be set to keep the original aspect ratio of the image. And yes, it can. You would have to do that in code. So what you would do is you would set the file name of the image, then you'd work out the original aspect ratio. So there are properties that you can use to do that. So if I go into edit mode and select my image, open up the inspector, then the control has a width and a height, and that's just the actual width and height of the control here. What you can do is there are properties called the formatted width and the formatted height, and they will return sort of the original width and height of the image itself. You can then use that to work out what the ratio of width to height is, and then you can resize your control so that the width and height match that ratio. So yes, you can do that in code. And what I'll do is when I write up some slides to go after this discussion, I'll put in an example of how you could do that. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat and see if we've got any other questions in here. Okay, so Peter's asked about the difference between a custom command and a custom function. So the main difference between a command and a function is, so this here that we created, our show next image, that's a command because that just does something. A custom function will return a value. So a command just executes some code and does something. A function, when you execute it, will actually return a value. So you might have a function that does a calculation, or that goes and retrieves something from a server for you. So commands don't return anything, and functions do return something. And when it comes to actually writing your code, when you call a command, you just put the command name, and if you had some parameters, they would just go after that. So param1, p, param2. The difference is that if you are using a function, so for example, special folder path is a function, it's not a custom function, but it's a LiveCode function, then any parameters that you pass go after it in brackets. So those are the two main differences in terms of use. A command does something and a function returns something. And when you're actually calling them, commands have no brackets after them, and functions do have brackets after them. So hopefully that is what you needed there. Okay, so that was our first question from last week. Our second question from last week was about the data grid. So I'm just going to get this out of the way. So we'll do a very brief introduction to data grids for anybody who hasn't looked at them yet. And then I'll specifically look at the question that we got asked. So I'll just create another new stack, and I will drag on a data grid, which is this control here. Again, it's one of the sort of classic controls, a data grid, and this is it here. And a data grid is sort of like, I guess it's a bit like a table or a bit like a spreadsheet. It's a way of showing lots of structured information all at once. And there are two types. There's tables and forms, and tables are quite simple. They're kind of like spreadsheets. They've got columns. You just put the data in and it shows up. Forms are a lot more complicated. Forms, you can completely create the row template for each row in your data grid. It can have any controls you want, and it can look like anything. So what I'll do is I'm just going to show you something quite useful, which is our data grid lessons. So if you go to lessons.livecode.com, which is a little slow because my home internet is not used to this level of having to work. So if you scroll down, we've got a whole section on the data grid. So the data grid is a really powerful control in LiveCode, but it is a bit more complicated than buttons and fields and things like that. So we have a whole section of lessons on the data grid, and it's a really useful control. I use it quite a lot. So it's worth getting to grips with if you want to be able to display a lot of data in your app. I would say that spending the time to get to grips with the data grid is really worth it. And there's lots of lessons here. It'll start right from scratch and take you all the way through it. So there's, what is the data grid? Can you show me some examples? So I would recommend having a look at the lessons if you are at all interested in using data grids. Okay, so here is a data grid that we've just dragged out. If I open up the object inspector for the data grid, then we'll have a look at some of the properties that it has. So on its basic properties, it's just got a name, a label, a tooltip, things that all controls have. Then here on the second tab, which is the data grid tab, you can see that you can have style, which is a table or a form. scroll bars, some different options here. Then you've got the contents of the data grid, which is the data that it's actually going to show. Then we've got the columns, because it's like a spreadsheet, so it's got columns. This is for a data grid table. Forms don't have columns in the same way, but we're only going to look at the table today. And then you've got your colors, graphic effects, text formatting. So we're going to start with our data grid. I'm just going to call it data grid because it's a little bit easier. And then we're going to add some columns. So before you can actually add much data to your data grid, you want to have some columns. So to add your columns, just click here to add column, and we'll add 3. And you see that those immediately appear in your data grid. And then you can use the property inspector to set the column name. I'll call that name, and you'll see it changed up here. Column 2 can be address. And column 3 can be phone number. Now, the simplest thing you can do with the data grid is just type some data in. So if we go to the contents pane, your data will be tab separated, so A, B, C, and line separated. So tabs between the columns, lines between the rows. And there you go, you've got some data in your data grid. And it has some nice built-in features. You can alphabetically reorder by the different columns, select the lines. So if you want to display data in that sort of form, in a sort of spreadsheet-like form, then the data grid is really powerful. So obviously we typed it in there, but if you want to, say, query a database and get some data back and display it in a data grid, how do you do that? So we'll add some code to this button. Call this populate. And I'm just going to name my stack DG example. Save that to the desktop in case we lose anything. Okay, and then come back to my populate button, open up the object script, and add a mouse up handler. And I'm just going to create a variable, which is local tdata. So because just following on from what we talked about earlier, because I've declared this inside this mouse up handler, then it's only accessible by this handler. And I'm just going to manually put some data in. So I'll put Elanor, and then ampersand tab, because it's tab separated data for a data grid. And then address can be 123 Main Street. And then tab, and then phone number 12345. So once you've got your data, whether that's come from a web service, come from a data grid, come from a database, come from a text file that you have stored locally, you then set the DG text of group data grid, because it's actually a group of controls, group data grid, to put that into my variable. So put that all into T data. And then set the DG text, the group data grid, to T data, apply that, go into run mode, click populate, and the data grid is populated with that data. So the two ways you can do it are you can have sort of text data like this, which is tab and line separated. You can also create an array instead. So if you wanted to do an array, we would put Elanor into T data, and this will be row 1. And the name of the column is name. We would put the address into T data, row 1, and then the column name, address, and then we would do the phone number into T data 1 phone. And when you're using an array like this, instead of sort of a text format, then instead of setting the DG text, we set the DG data. Group DataGrid to T-data, and I'll just change this so that we can see that we are actually changing it. Make sure I'm in run mode, click populate, and you'll see that that's the new data. I just put the A on there. So the two ways to do it are with sort of a text style tab and line separated, or with an array, which you might prefer. Depending on how your data comes in, it might be actually easier to format it as an array. And obviously, if you had another value here, it'd be T-data to name, address, phone, etc. Just have a quick glance at the chat to see if there's any questions, but no, not at the moment. So I'm just going to, the question that we got last week was actually how to populate the data grid from some fields. So if we had some fields here, so if we had three text entry fields for our name, address, and phone number, how would we add this to the current data in the data grid? So I've created three fields. I'm going to give them names. So in the object inspector, the first one will be name, and one will be address, third one will be phone, and we'll add an add button. And we'll add some code to our add button in our object script. And again, we're just going to respond to mouse up. Now, the first thing we're going to get is we're going to get the data that's in these three fields. And then we're going to add it to the data grid. Just got a question, so I'm just going to read that. So the question is, the data grid and the table field, which one is faster when it comes to displaying data? So I would say that the table field is probably a bit faster. There's probably not much in it, but the table field is probably faster. The data grid, it's just much more more formatted. Not quite sure how to, more structured, I guess, is a better way to put it. For example, you can't set an array on the table field. And just so that everybody knows what we're talking about with a table field, we'll add another stack here. So this is a table field. Doesn't want to drag. So I'm not sure why that's happening. I'm just going to quickly save that, and I'm just going to restart LiveCode. I'm not sure why that doesn't want to drag out. Okay, so I'll just reopen my DG example. I'll open a new stack. So the table field is this one here. And it's a normal field. It's just got certain properties set on it that make it display as a table field. So you can see here some of the properties that are set you've got horizontal grid, vertical grid, the tab stops, which is the width of the columns. They can actually be different from each other. So you could have 100 and then 50 and then 75. So it's a field, and it's for displaying tab separated data. But the columns aren't, they are split, but they're not real columns. It's just tab separated values. So it's just text with tab separated values. So actually it really depends. If you just want to display it and you just want to put it into field and have it there, then maybe just use a table field. If you want to be able to sort of access certain parts of it, or if you want to be able to use features like the automatic ability to sort and things like that, then use a data grid. It may be that you can start with a table field, and if it doesn't provide all the features that you want, move over to a data grid. Yeah, I would say that probably use the data grid if you want the features of the data grid. If you just want to display it and you want it to be really fast, then maybe just put it in a field. Okay, so coming back to our question, we've got our three fields, our name, address, and phone. And we've got our add button. So the first thing we're going to do, there's our mouse up, is we're going to get the values from those fields. We're just going to put them into some variables, just because I find that a little bit easier to work with. So we just put field name into name. Do the same for address and phone. And I'm going to show you two ways to add data to the data grid. First is probably the more simple way, and the second is probably a bit more useful. So the first way is just to get the data that's currently in there, put the new data on the end, and reset the data on the data grid. So what we do is we put the DG text, so this is the current value of group data grid, into T data. We then create a new line, so we put return after T data. We then put our new information on the end, so we put name and tab and the address and tab and T phone. And we put that after T data because we want to append it to the end, so we put it after. And then we set the DG text of group data grid to T data. So we've just taken the value that's currently in there, created a new line, put our data on the end, and then reset the DG text. So if I put some values in here and then click add, then you'll see it goes into the data grid. So that's the first way to do it. But if you've got a really huge amount of data in there, say you've got 1,000 lines, this means you have to get your 1,000 lines, you have to append your new data onto the end, and then you have to reset it. So it's maybe not the most efficient way of doing it. So the data grid actually has a function that you can use to do it. So we've got our data here. So we're now going to create a row of data, which is similar to what we did before. So it'll be T name and tab and T address and tab and T phone. And we'll put that into T new row. So that's just a variable with those values tab separated. Then we need to know the names of the columns in our data grid. So we put its name, and they need to be line separated. So and return, and then the next one is address and return. This is just so that the data grid will know which columns you want to put the data into. Return and phone. That's entity columns. So that's our list of the columns that we want to add data to. Because you don't need to do all of them. You could miss one out if you wanted to. If you just wanted to put the name in, that would be fine, as long as you specify the columns that you're interested in. Then we need to know what line number our next row is going to be. So to find out how many rows we've already got, there is a property of the data grid called the DG number of lines. So we put the DG number of lines of group data grid. And then we want to put it on the next line, so we add 1. We put that into T row index. That's all the information that we need. We've got our new row, we've got the columns that we're interested in, and we've got the row index of the new line. And then what we do is we dispatch, which means that we can send the value to the control, because as I mentioned last week, for anybody who attended last week, the way that the message path works in LiveCode is that messages will go from a button to a card to a stack. So they'll always go sort of up the hierarchy of the message path. In this case, our button and our data grid are on the same level. If we want to be able to send messages between things on the same level, so two controls on a card, then we can use dispatch or we can use send. So we can go sort of outside the standard message path, which is always going up the hierarchy, to sort of go sideways using dispatch. So we dispatch, and the name of the function is add line. And we send that to our DataGrid group. So we dispatch it to group DataGrid. And we say with, and it's our T new row. These are our parameters. So it's the T new row, which is the data, T columns, which is the list of columns that we're interested in, and T row index, which is what the index of our new row should be. So now if I change the values in here, so I'll go X, Y, Z and click add, then it appears on the end. And we can do that without having to get the DG data of the whole data grid, append stuff on the end and then reset it. We're sort of getting around that and we're just interested in adding a line to our data grid. And there is actually a lesson in the data grid section of the lessons, which shows exactly how to add a line in this way to your data grid. So if you want to have a look at that, it's all documented there. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look and see what other questions we've got. Can we show how to add a different action to the button if the option or command key is down? Yeah, so there are actually ways to check. So you would still use mouse up or mouse down, but while you are in there, you could say, you can check if the command key is down. Let me find the right yeah, so there's a function called the command key, and there's a control key and a other ones. So what you can do is in your mouse up, you can say if the command key is down, then do something. So for example, in our mouse up, we can say if the command key is down, then just to see what's happening, we can answer command, else we would do our sort of normal normal work. So now if I hold the command key down and I click on the add button, we should get an answer dialog. So you can use the command key function, which in the dictionary is here. So it's the command key to check the state of the command key when you get a message. And then Peter's asked if there is any difference between return and CRLF. So this is one of the things I can never remember off the top of my head. It does say in the dictionary, I think. So the return constant is the equivalent of CR or line feed or LF, which you can also click on these options here. I always use return because it seems to work better cross-platform. But yes, it's the equivalent of the line feed character. So if you specifically wanted to use carriage return, you could use the CR or LF or whichever one you actually need. I almost always use return. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. And then Daniel's asked, why isn't there any new stack default for iPhone X, 11 or 11 Pro? So we just haven't added them as defaults. I think there is an enhancement request to have more options for our default sizes. But all these they are just default sort of a way to create a stack at a particular size. You can create your stack any size you want. So you can create it at an iPhone 11 size just by setting the width and the height of your stack. I will look into if we have an enhancement request, and if not, I'll add one because it would be useful to have those other defaults, even though it is just a width and a height. And then he's asked, how can I use the whole display for these devices? So this is actually a really useful thing to bring up. Thank you. So what we have is we have a function called full screen mode, which I'll just show you in the dictionary here. So the full screen mode tells your stack how you want it to resize on the device that it's running on. And it's useful on desktop, but it's most useful on mobile devices, so on iOS and Android devices. So what you can do is you can create your stack at any size you want, and then you tell LiveCode how to resize that stack to use the space on the device that it is deployed to. So what you do is you just set the full screen, so on pre-open stack, for example, so when the stack is opened, you set the full screen mode of your stack to whichever method you want to use. And the options are empty, which means that the stack's not resized, that's effectively like not setting it. Exact fit, which will use all the space on the device, but it might skew images and things because it's not going to maintain the aspect ratio. So there's letterbox, which does maintain the aspect ratio and puts black bars at the top and bottom or left and right as required. There's no scale, which puts it in the middle of the screen. And then there's show all, which preserves the aspect ratio. But if there are any controls that are outside of the bounds of your stack, then those will also show. And what I mean by that is, for example, you could have a button that's sort of like partially off screen there. And sometimes people use this as a way to hide controls. They just move them off out of the sort of visible area. They're still there. They're just at, if you put something, so you can see here, if I look at the property inspector for that button and look at the size and position of it, then you can see that its left side is actually -30. So it's 30 pixels off the left of the stack, which is 0, which is the left border. So yeah, the full screen mode is how we recommend that you get your app scaling on different devices. And it mostly works really well as long as you choose the exact, the sort of the method that you want to use. There are also options to allow your screen to use the full screen mode, but also change orientation. So you can change from being portrait, turn your phone and it goes landscape, and it will still resize all your controls correctly. So yeah, full screen mode, that's a good one to remember if you're doing mobile development. And then Lonnie's said, in the phone sample online, they work with SQLite. Any preference between MySQL and SQLite using LiveCode? So it really depends on what you need. SQLite is just local. It's just, so you would include it with your app, and it's readable and writable, but only on your local system. So if you had your app running on your phone and on your desktop, those would be two completely separate databases and they wouldn't affect each other. MySQL obviously is online. It's a server database. So if you wanted your data in your database to be preserved between your phone and your desktop, then you might go with MySQL. That's probably the main reason. Also, SQLite is, it's free. So if you're in development and you're just sort of getting started, then maybe just create yourself an SQLite database and then think about moving it to MySQL later if you need to. But the main difference is the difference between just local data and remotely available data on a server database. Yeah, that's probably the main reason there. And we're pretty much at the end of our hour. So if there are any last minute questions, just pop them in the chat. And I'll try and do what I did last week, which is write up some slides that cover some of the things that we talked about today, which will hopefully be useful for you as well. And other than that, have a good week. Good luck with your ongoing LiveCode journey, and I will see you all next week. Oh, so Dev's just asked, are these recorded? And I think they are recorded. And I think what happened was sometime this week, a link was sent out to the recording of last week's session. So when that is sent out, then you'll be able to rewatch the video once that gets sent out. So yeah, I believe that these are going to be weekly Q&As, so same time next week for another 1 hour session. So get your questions ready for me. yes, I believe there is at least another one next week. I don't actually know how long we're planning to run these for, but there definitely is one next week. Okay, so thanks for attending, everybody, and thanks for your questions. And yes, good luck, and have a good week, everybody.